see that
It
we
does
are
ring.
live. Okay, cool. Today we've got on the show Brandon Ellrich, the owner of the Brandon Is So Gay publication, and today we are about to talk about some horror movies and some gay movies. If you want to briefly introduce yourself or anything you've been working on, feel free to go ahead, Brandon.
All right. Yes, as he said, I'm Brandon Ellrich. Brandon Ellrich is so gay, and I've been I've been watching queer movies for because October is LGBTQ History Month, but it's also Halloween this month. So um, I watched a bunch of kind of queer history movies or associated with queer history. And then Ben asked if I knew of any gay horror movies. So I started searching that, and there were a lot more than I thought there would be. And I've come up with two lists. One is a list of queer movies, kind of queer history, and the other is queer horror movies. And when I got done with the list, I realized that kind of the history movies, the one based on the true stories, are a little more horrific than the actual fictional horror movies. I mean, you kind of have to watch the fictional horror movies to decompress from watching the history ones. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised watching the Laramie Project last night, just how well that fit into my general horror movie mold of the month.
Right,
But
right.
it really is a horrific story, and yeah,
Mhm.
like you say, the sheer unrealism of horror movies makes them more manageable in a lot of ways because you don't feel like you're grounded in reality, and you don't generally deal with crazy supernatural presences trying to possess
Right,
you and whatnot.
Yeah.
right,
And it's always the case that the true things human beings have done to each other, and particularly the histories that are suppressed, they're always worse. They're worse than anything anybody could ever make up. And it's just sort of like, yeah, I think I'm coming around to Ben's way of thinking about things where sometimes it's good to watch those horror movies just to like, you know, detach yourself from the horrors of reality, but then you got to dump back in. Last week we were going through the with Arturo Dominguez and Shane Urek. We were going through the case files of Republicans who've been caught for sexual misconduct, and it was just like as you're reading some of these things, you're like, God, and just the general intolerance of the United States of America. Like this is a nation that's based on that, and I think just all the things are connected. It seems like rape culture is connected to white supremacy, which is connected to homophobia. So yeah,
right.
it's all gonna come out in the wash, and so a horror movie to kind of like break up the horror of reality makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, and I read that article Ben wrote was it just last week about horror movies being kind of an escape?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the virtues of reverse escapism, I call that, and I'm glad that I finally came up with a term for that element because everybody just thinks about movies being escapes, but really it can be just the opposite in many ways because horror movies really aren't what people first think of when they think of escaping, and it's the respite that comes after watching those movies sometimes that makes the experience so enjoyable. Like what I was saying a minute ago about just yeah, coming out of it and realizing, my personal problems and the problems of the world aren't quite as bad as they are for these
Yeah.
protagonists.
At least I don't have
And,
vampires breaking down the door, or
Right.
it
well, the
could be
vampires
worse.
they might be kind of fun actually. The vampires.
Yeah,
We still have Stephen Miller to worry about, but
Oh God, yeah, yeah.
Dash McIntyre and I were talking a few days ago about how Stephen Miller would be so perfectly cast as Nosferatu, and really,
Yeah,
that was a missed opportunity. They should have reached out to
yeah.
him. I'm sure they probably did.
yeah,
Well, you're right. The horror movies are a bigger genre than people kind of, when you just kind of mention it superficially. There's a lot more that goes into it than. Well, people are dismissive of all things, I guess. Science fiction too. There's a lot that goes into that. So yeah, good to hear.
So
No,
getting into I figured I'd talk about the historical ones first to get that out of the way and maybe end more on a positive note with the horrors. you know,
Yeah.
so
Oh.
one of them that I watched was the well, I don't know if I got to go backwards or the first one I watched, but well, since you mentioned Laramie Project, I did watch that. Laramie Project was from 2002, and that one actually wasn't as impactful for me as the documentary was, because the
Hmm.
Laramie Project is basically a fictionalized portrayal of a documentary being made, and it's it has a lot of stars in it.
Yeah.
There's Cameron Manheim, Christina Ricci, Steve Buscemi, Laura Linney, Joshua Jackson. That there were a bunch of them, but in that way, it was a little distracting for me because I was so familiar with all these actors, and when I get into a movie, I want to believe it's real, kind of really just get into it. And for me, that one was a little difficult because it was based on something true, and it had all these actors, and I was like, it was just difficult for me to believe it. You know, I think it's still a good movie to watch, and I think especially people that are outside of the LGBTQ community should watch it. But for me personally, it wasn't quite as impactful as especially watching the documentary. So in 2023, just a couple of years ago, the Matthew Shepard story, An American Hate Crime. It was made on the 25th anniversary of this incident, and you get to hear the actual interrogation tapes of Aaron McKinney in the interrogated by the police, and what he actually said, and his voice and everything. And for me, that was a lot more impactful. And it showed pictures of Matthew after what happened to him, when he was in the hospital bed, his face and everything. And um, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Because they don't actually show Matthew Shepard at all in the Laramie Project movie. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because it was the events, that everything that occurred after that, and people coming in to make the documentary and interviewing people. But in the actual documentary, of course, they interviewed Matthew's actual friends. You hear tapes from his mother and father, and uh, they interviewed the police officer that found him, or that I think actually a cyclist found him, but the police officer that came and first cut him away from the fence, uh, and all of that. So for me, that was very emotional to hear that, and that the whole experience for me is just very emotional because I can easily put myself in his place. It's he lived in a very small rural area, and even though it was in a different state, mine is not dissimilar. Uh, I could, if I were in the wrong place at the wrong time, I could see something like that happening to me. So that's pretty impactful story for me.
When it happened, were you old enough to really grapple with what it was? I know you're a bit older than me, but still, we're pretty young when it
Yeah,
actually occurred.
yeah. He was. I mean, he wasn't much. I don't like to reveal my age, but it was. It was definitely. I knew about it at the time, and I was in the closet at the time, and I feel like something like that, even if I had wanted to come out, when you hear
Mhm.
about something like that happening, it's like, why would you? If Especially if you relate to where he's from, the community, the conservative rural area, it's like, if I come out, that could that could happen to me. I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna tell anybody I'm gay.
Yeah, and
It's so interesting because it just reminds me like there was just that constant fear when I was growing up, same thing, conservative rural area, and just you constantly felt like your life was threatened. And just, and it would for something as small as just reading or being a good student, that could all be part of it too. And I hadn't remembered the name when you said it, but I did remember this story from growing up, and it was just one of those things where it's like, and I was kind of curious when you were watching the documentary, what was your impression of when the person who did this, when you heard his voice? I mean, what was this like just a complete sociopath, or was this a person who sounds like, because a lot of the times it's like all the people that we're surrounded with constantly and they all speak the same and they shout the same thing. So I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Um, to me, it didn't sound like he had any kind of remorse at all. The investigator, one of the things that struck me was, well, um, some people said that it wasn't a hate crime, that it was just a robbery gone bad and that kind of thing. They tried to downplay the the aspect that Matthew was gay and that they did it for that reason. In the investigation, the detective asked, well, when he asked about Matthew approaching, he said, "Well, what did he look like?" And Aaron said, uh, "Like a queer, such a queer dude." And the investigator said, "Like a queer dude?" He said, "Yeah, like a fag." So just hearing him say that, that was on his mind. He recognized that Matthew was gay, and just from that statement alone that played a significant role in why they did this. And one of the, I can't remember if it was his girlfriend or the girlfriend of Russell Henderson, that said that they had talked about their hatred of gays, and she later retracted that statement, and that might have been prompted by the defense attorneys or something like that. And then they did end up using, the defense used the gay panic defense, because Aaron claimed that Matthew made a move on it, like put his hand on his leg or something, which didn't make any sense, because Aaron said it was, the way he told the story, it was after he had the gun out, uh, pointed at Matthew. Why would you make a move on somebody that had a gun pointed at you? That doesn't make any sense. But I think they were just grasping at straws, whatever they could do to try to get him off or get a lesser sentence or something.
I think one of the
So,
most point I think one of the most poignant aspects of the movie for me was the way that it explored the culture of homophobia that led to the crime taking place, and how so many people in the town had this attitude that, "Oh, wow, what happened to him was terrible, and that shouldn't happen to anyone." But I hope he had
yeah,
time to think about what he did and how he
yeah,
shouldn't have been gay before God, and you can see people who have this real cognitive dissonance around it, where they do think that he was wrong for being who he was, but also that he shouldn't have died for it. And that's so much of the problem, that people are just have that latent attitude of homophobia. And it even kind of casts not both of the murders, but I thought one of the two murderers in this almost light of sympathy, where you feel like he's a bit of a victim of that culture himself, and growing up around all these pastors and teachers who say, "Oh, it's wrong to be gay," and just seeped into him. And it, you don't feel bad for him, but it was just an interesting way, I thought, that they cast one of the two killers.
yeah, it's
I
almost
I
inevitable
was
that he would turn out that way.
Yeah,
Sorry, Walter, go.
Well, go ahead. And I was just gonna say, I've always been surrounded. There's all these angry people who are like looking for something to get worked up about, and it could be based on race, and it could be based on homosexuality, but it's just, or it could just be the car you drive, or the fact that you've got a sticker from the opposing football team. There's like these, and they will work themselves up to a murderous rage. And this
Yeah.
is just this thing that's in, and we've got a society where people grab guns and shoot people at schools too. And it just seems like all of it is kind of together where we just have that resentment. And I think, yeah, religion, well, religion overlaps a lot with and grooming for white supremacy. It just does. You get your central authority figure. You have to be obeyed and all those things, and telling people they aren't good enough, and and then there's all this abuse that goes on within those systems too, where you see these patriarchal systems where the father abuses his kids, boys and girls, which is abuse, and that's not. We're talking about rape culture there, and that's not sexual preference. That's a different thing. And then this stuff all gets like bound in and it explodes in these various different ways. And then our society just, no matter what way it comes into to the spotlight, we just figure out a way to brush it aside, cause blame and blame innocent people once again. I don't have any answers for this. It's one of those things I constantly wrestle with. I just am finding there's a lot of ways it overlaps with a lot of different things. And I think, just solidarity, Brandon, the same fear. I felt that fear. And I worry about my kids and I worry about you and I worry about Ben, and all we can do to talk about it and just try to understand it and actually come to, I guess we just have to have the courage to start saying what the real problems are, because I think we're all kind of indoctrinated to a lesser extent to just not even talk about these hard issues. So thanks for bringing it in today.
One
Yeah.
one thing
Oh, sorry.
one thing that I really liked about the way that they cast such big name characters for it was that it had probably more of an ability to come to the forefront as a cultural issue than if they had picked lesser known actors. But I do see what you mean though, because a lot of my favorite movies, and one I just watched recently, The Long Walk, I think was especially poignant for me because I didn't know any of the characters who were in it, and it just added
Yeah.
this sense of realism for me. But yeah, I think that it's important in a way that they got such well known actors to take on the roles of those towns. Like there's a real strong argument to be built either way.
Yeah. And I kind of wonder if I mean, to have that many, because there were a lot of people that I recognized in it, a lot of actors. And I wonder if maybe they took a lesser pay or something in order to get, I mean, they would have had to have a pretty big budget to have that many well-known actors in it. And I wonder, I didn't read up on whether or not they did, but I that that could be a possibility. But there was also the movie, the Matthew Shepard story in 2002 that starred Sam Waterston and Stockard Channing as Matthew's parents. That was a dramatization, of course, but I really held off on that one. I really didn't want to watch it because um, I figured they would probably depict what happened to him. The actual act, him being beaten and everything. And I I didn't want to watch it. You know, I I wasn't sure how well I could handle seeing that, even though I know it was fictional, and a lot of times I have to do that. In situations like that, I have to remind myself, okay, these are actors. This is this is not happening. Except in this case, it did happen. And it was really hard to remove myself, disassociate from that because I knew it was a true story. And so it was hard to tell myself, these are actors, this is not really happening. But I do feel like I wish that more people who are not in the queer community would watch these kind of movies, because I think they need to know what could happen, what has happened to people in the community. I think it's
Yeah.
important for them to see that.
I've got a bit of a
Yeah.
personal connection to the Laramie Project that I might even have a hard time talking about without getting a bit emotional. But there was this play done at my junior high school where they did the Laramie Project, and man, that I to date I don't think I've ever been so deeply affected by a play that I saw. And the fact that they got a cast of seventh and eighth graders to do that, it it felt pretty revolutionary to me when I first saw it, but as time has gone on, it's just meant more and more to me, not only that they did something so daring with such a young cast of actors, but just that I live in a community that would be willing to put on a play like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand that. I I think it would be more impactful for me too if I saw it in real life. Uh, People, especially that young, like you were saying, that would put on something like that. I think that would be definitely very impactful.
I've been very curious to go back and revisit it because I know that it was filmed and footage of it does still exist, but to see that cast do that again as an adult, I think would feel very differently because at the time it was people who were my age, and you kind of just have this. It's you don't really understand age and adulthood as much when you're young, and you kind of just feel like, oh, these are my contemporaries. But to go back and see that footage and just see that young cast of actors do something like that, it's yeah, I'm really thankful to live where I do and to be in a community that thought, this is a hard subject and it's going to be a difficult watch for a lot of people, but it's an important one.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
And- Yeah. And as a parent too, it's one of those things where I know my girls, they're like, "Daddy," because you're complaining about things, but it's just like you're just telling them, "You watch out for this, watch out for that," all the time, and you want to protect them and you want to make sure nothing bad happens, and they hear it so often, but then something bad does happen, and I'm just at the point too now where just the irresponsible level of our society, and it makes me, like rage cry where I start talking about it with people and I'll get really upset. And I think that's important. It's important to have those emotions because so much of our society is designed to just push away and just brush these things under the rug. We're great. America's great. Go live somewhere else, then they say. And then that nonsense. They have these nonsensical arguments like, well, in other countries it'd be worse. And it's like, I've lived in other countries. We don't have there in the other countries I live, they did not have this basic level of hatred. And I didn't even recognize the basic level of hatred until I was 30 or so, Even because I was so busy ducking and covering and running, but I felt that constant terror, and we feel that, and every now and then it just comes up where you react to something without even a reason why. You're like, my kids aren't going to do this, I'm not going to put them on the bus or whatever. I mean, there's things you protect, and people are like, well, you're being hysterical, and it's like, well, I'm not. My instincts tell me not to do this, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, how we make progress, and I think what you're saying is right. Having people watch these shows. I mean, every now and then my wife will read an article and it's about some kid and some horrible thing. I'm just like, stop. I can't sometimes, because it's on my mind all the time. And it's like, I can't hear that right now. But it's like, I do think that through the work that we try to do here and try to talk about these issues responsibly, yeah, once you get that awareness of just the reality of that basic level of rage and who is behind it and how we can fix it, that has to be the way we can go forward to make it better. And we have to make it better. That's the other takeaway, I guess.
One of my favorite scenes from the movie was when one of the actors who went on to put on the Laramie play, the Laramie Project play, was talking to one of the pastors in the town and was just saying, uh, yeah, I hope that when he was tied to that fence, he had a moment to really think about what he did wrong. And
Yeah.
Yeah,
she kind of just stands there and just says, thank you for talking to me. And you see afterwards just how much of a weight
yeah,
it was on her that she just let him say that to her face. And like, how could I not respond? How did I just let him say that to me like it was nothing? And that was
yeah,
that was a scene that really stuck with me.
yeah. Yeah, I remember what you're talking about. I remember that scene too.
Yeah. Those moments too, I know because I've encountered those lately too. And it takes a while because when people say things that are just awful like that, I'm getting better at correcting them. I had somebody start going on about because it was regard to my wife being an immigrant, and the guy said, "Well, is she here illegally?" He starts off with that right away, and I was just like, "Doesn't matter." And then he's like, "Well, does she get mad at people who come here and don't do it the fair way like she did?" I said, "Buddy, when racists start to harass her, do you think that they check to see if she's here legally or not?" And I remember this guy he woke up. But this was like the fifth time somebody had made a statement like that to me. And I think we have to kind of prepare ourselves to have, because we're so indoctrinated to respect those authority figures. When they say awful things, they say awful things, and it's all normalized. That's horrific what that person said. To make that statement to somebody who lost their child, and then we're seen as wrong if we go yell at a priest. I've told priests to go fuck themselves before. The local priest, like the week after Uvalde, I was writing that we should arrest people if they sell automatic rifles that are then used in school shootings. And the priest, this was on social media, he writes back, well, then we'd have to arrest people for selling cars to drunk drivers. And I said, fuck you. And I sent him this big long message. I'm like, I mean, these kids just died, because I was all riled up anyway, because those kids just died. And I did see him again after that face to face, and he was all kind of passive. He didn't try to pull his authority bullshit on me. But we have to break that down, because so much of this bad stuff is allowed to live because we're all indoctrinated to just see these authority figures as irrefutable. They have that smirk and that power, and they say those awful things. And yeah, I think it's not easy though. I mean, it's not like I'm criticizing anybody for being stupefied in those moments, and sometimes the best thing to do is to get out of there. But I've been trying over the last year or so to speak up more
Yeah, that's
and
sometimes
just hold these people accountable.
that's sometimes my problem when I'm in the moment. I'm like, sometimes you're just in shock by what people say, and you're like, I
Yeah.
can't believe this person just said this, and you're kind of like,
Yeah.
you don't know how to respond in the moment, and later, of course, I might think, oh, I should have said this, or I should have pushed back
Yeah.
against this, or whatever, and I'm really bad about that, about what I should have said,
Yeah.
I
but
wrote a
Yeah.
I wrote a recent piece called "A Trump Supporter Walked Into the Bar,"
yeah,
in which I spoke about this Trump supporter who I was speaking with at the bar, and he it was like you say, it was just so difficult in the moment to know what you say in response to some of the information that he was or disinformation that he was trying to present to me. And it's I likened it to that feeling when someone asks you, "Oh, what are your favorite songs from this specific artist?" And even if
yeah,
you're a huge fan, you're just like, you just don't know what to say in those moments, and you draw a painful blank. And afterwards, you're just thinking, "Oh, I could have said this. I could have said this.
yeah.
Maybe this is the information that would have changed his mind." And I think that I didn't do a horrible job, but afterwards in the car ride home even, I was just thinking about, how differently that interaction could have gone and how much more I could have said, and yeah, it's
Well, I think that's. Oh, sorry.
one of my favorite aspects of the movie was the way that it, explored the idea of how so many people in the town were like, "Oh, this isn't our town. This isn't our town. This doesn't represent us." And other people coming to the painful realization that if this happened here, if this attitude led to this, then it does happen here. Then this is us, and we have to reckon with the fact that this is us.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I can understand them saying that it doesn't represent everyone in this town, but they did come from there. They are from there. They were raised in your environment.
Yep.
There's something wrong if the if that's what the product is.
Yep.
Something got messed up along the way. But
Yeah.
anyway, moving on from that, I guess. But
Yeah.
um, I don't
Oh,
know if
Brandon, thanks for talking with these things. These are so important. I appreciate that you brought this in, and I think we're all feeling the same, just heartsick, and it's just so many different ways. Because we just see it again and again, so frustrating, where you see this hardship just go on in the world, and then the people that are in power do nothing, and then they blame the innocent again unfairly. It just again and again and again. It's always the same story. So just thanks for coming in and talking about it, and hopefully we'll feel a little bit better
Well,
after.
I appreciate you allowing me to. I mean, part of the reason I bring him up so much is, not only is it National LGBTQ History Month, but it's the anniversary of his murder. Last on the 12th is when he actually succumbed to his injuries, and then so this is kind of this whole month is kind of significant, especially for that story. But another a show that I recently watched. It's not. I wouldn't. I guess I wouldn't call it like a historical one, but Coming Out Colton. So I don't know if you've heard of it or watched it at all, but Colton Underwood, he was an NFL player, and
Oh,
he was he was a contestant on The Bachelorette. He was one of the guys that she was the Bachelorette was choosing from, and he wasn't picked in the end. And a lot of times, what they do is they take someone who wasn't chosen and they make them the Bachelor of the next season. So that's what happened with him. He was the Bachelor, and he had all these women that he got to know and dated and whatnot. And after the show, he they broke up, the the woman that he chose, and he came out as gay. And he was in this show, he's coming out to his parents and friends, and he goes back to his high school coach and talks about how what the culture was like in the locker room and that kind of thing, and still today I think it is very much a homophobic place where people are calling each other gay as a derogatory term, and if you're
mhm.
if you're not performing well, they use the term gay and that kind of thing. And so he was going back to his coach and just letting him know, I experienced this. I was gay growing up, but there's no way I was coming out in this kind of culture. I know I would have been ridiculed. I wouldn't have been able to continue playing sports, and even and throughout the NFL too. He was always afraid to come out because of our kind of toxic masculine sort of culture that teaches you you're not a man if you're gay. And so I mean, he went to the extreme of going on the being the Bachelor, trying to date all these women, trying to be quote unquote normal, trying to be straight, and it didn't work. And he finally, came out, but he didn't feel like he was able to all through school and NFL and things like that. So it was a really good series. Even if you're not into The Bachelor or Bachelorette, I'm not really, but I thought this was a pretty cool series.
One of my favorite things about the movie Brokeback Mountain was the way that I could reflect not just on how different culture was in the time period that the movie depicts, but how different it was even when it came out. And because in 2005, I remember it was still like a very common thing to just use gay as an insult. And
Yeah,
in my own lifetime, it's really remarkable that that's completely fallen out of people's vocabularies, at least the people I know. It was so common. It just, oh my God, those sweatpants are gay. Those shoes are gay. And
right,
now the only way I ever hear that is just completely ironically. Like,
I
right,
I'd say what comes to my mind is like part of a lot of these hate ideologies, it seems to be stopping children from having the ability to form healthy relationships. That seems to be the essence, I think. Whether, and again, it's across all of them, because I was, when we were talking to Allison Wilts the other day, and I was just like, because like the white supremacy culture doesn't accept you, even if you're white, it won't accept you unless you're like cruel. And we've seen that in history. Like the Italians came over and they were not considered white, so they were treated to bigotry until they were able to learn to kind of emulate. And that's the KKK slang. Slang. America, love it or leave it, is a KKK slogan. And so it's just like it kind of comes down to that, where people then they're also suppressed, and it's like, and that's why we're not even allowed to have strong male friendships, even at that level. And then they'll attack you for that. And I remember something weird my dad said when I was young. It was like we wanted a puppy, and he says, "Well, then the puppy will just die, and feel sad." And this was like this. It blew my mind that this was his thought about what it meant to have a relationship with a puppy? Like just to love a puppy and all it's going to be is like vulnerability and pain to you. And I think though it's like the silver lining I'm getting from all these studies is just like it's just that similar, because it's like we feel like we're isolated. Because I always wondered, it's like why does everybody hate me too? You're growing up and it's like they just hate me, and it's like why is that? And it's not, you know, they don't hate you because you're gay or because you're black or because you're trans. It's just because hate is the only thing this culture teaches, and so it's like to some extent, once I learned that, and that's what helps us who have been the victims of this or who have had to suffer from it. We can kind of find community together, and then it just helps you understand it wasn't you the whole time. And that's kind of a big thing to learn. And because I felt alone too growing up, and yeah, what happened to Matthew Shepard seems like it's something that could have happened to me too, just because of the hatred we endured. And so once we kind of identify maybe the root of the problem, that helps a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. You're kind of giving me a lot to just kind of contemplate today.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that when we have politicians and leaders who perpetuate this in our laws, when they say, no, we're going to restrict law, we're going to take away the Respect for Marriage Act or something like that, and other people who are kind of followers of that ideology might take that to an extreme, like take it on themselves, like
Yes.
kind of almost be vigilantes and like, well, our government says that these people, are not like us and whatever, and go after them, and that they take that from higher up. It kind of as if it's passed down to them to do something about it.
It's very interesting to me
Yeah.
how the administration keeps referring to the LGB community and trying to erase the T from the name, and it's
Oh yeah.
a horrible point of regression. But at the same time, it's very interesting to me that we've gotten to a place as a culture where even far right Republicans need to acknowledge that gay people and bisexual people and lesbians exist, and 20 years ago,
Well,
or
just
when Matthew Shepard happened, there were many people who would just say, "Oh, this is a horrible sin." And culture has shifted so much that a lot of those same people have developed different attitudes and know gay people in their lives and feel differently now.
yeah, and dehumanizing so many different groups of people. They're all and as Brandon says, like there are those numbers that are sociopaths then who then they have this information pumped into their heads all the time and they kill. And then but then in addition to them, there's that other big group that says nothing, and there's the other groups that doing the preaching, and so it's just like, and then we're fixated on just, well, the one guy who pulled the trigger, but then yeah, it's just so frustrating because immediately, the nefarious forces pushing these hate ideologies turn around and blame the innocent parties that they're already attacking, for the crimes that are committed against them. And it's just sitting here watching this happen again and again and again. It gets so frustrating.
Yeah, and it kind of
So
ties into the, "Oh, well, what was she wearing when she got sexually assaulted?" conversation. Like, "Oh, was he outwardly gay?
Right.
absolutely,
I don't know.
absolutely,
He might have invited this," and it's just a horrible way of thinking.
yes. Or
Yeah.
sketching out the plan or
The
the
victim blaming is so
Yeah.
horrible.
yeah.
On a happier note, I watched The Parenting on Brandon's
Yeah,
recommendation.
I was just about to switch. I was like, yeah, let's maybe we should move on. But so you watch The
Yes.
Parenting.
Yeah, this was one of our heavier conversations, but it's good to have these heavy conversations, and it very much ties into where we are as a culture, and it's not a separate issue from the world of entertainment because there's so many different movies and documentaries depicting this. But yes, The
Yeah.
Parenting. It was a horror comedy about a uh, gay couple renting out a house and having their separate in-laws meet each other for the first time, and it just does such a great job at depicting the sheer awkwardness of that. It was another movie that had a very loaded cast. Had
Yeah.
Brian Cox, the actor whose name I'm forgetting, who's one of the leads in Breaking Bad. I'm sure I know it. Do you remember the cast of
Um,
that movie,
I
Brandon?
I didn't watch Breaking Bad,
Oh,
but
no?
I know Parker Posey, Lisa Kudrow, and Edie Falco were the other ones in it.
Hmm.
Is one of those?
I I'm
I
blanking. I'm
don't know.
sure one of our viewers probably knows the name of
Dean Norris. You're probably Dean Norris.
oh, Dean Norris. Yep, that's right. That's right.
Oh, okay. I hadn't recognized. I saw his name, but I didn't recognize who that was.
Breaking Bad is one of those shows that I kind of just assume that everybody has seen at least once. So
I know. I was like,
it's
when it was popular, I didn't have that streaming. I don't remember what it was streaming on, but I didn't have that, so I was like, I just never got around to watching it.
yeah, it's an all-time favorite for me. I revisit that one pretty frequently. Gets
So,
a
what did you think
nearly
of the movie?
it was a really funny horror movie. Another good respite from some of the heavier movies that I've been watching. It's not actively terrifying in any way, but there are a
Oh
few
yeah,
scenes that are pretty creepy, if nothing else. But the comedy is like a kind of more benign, scary movie, like Scary Movie as in the franchise. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, there are a couple gross out scenes that I could have lived without, but by and large, I thought the comedy of in-laws meeting each other for the first time really was pretty hilarious. There were a few scenes that got a good laugh out of me, and that's what you're looking for in any comedy. Just a few
yeah.
of those scenes that really nail it.
It was definitely like it's a comedy horror base. I mean, more definitely more leans on the comedy side because
Yeah.
of course, there's the haunting and the demon possession and that kind of thing, but it's I thought it was really funny, and I was surprised that I had never heard of it before because of
Me
all
either.
the had several big names in it, and one reason I enjoyed it, even though there was a gay couple as kind of the two main characters, it didn't focus on the fact that they were gay. That really wasn't like an overarching theme in the movie. It was just two people, a couple having relationship issues and
Yeah.
dealing with their in-laws, and it's it was just a normal. I mean, anybody I think could relate to anybody in a relationship with in-laws can relate to this, and I would hope that anybody anybody in the straight community or uh, homophobic people, would still enjoy it because it's not about being gay, and it didn't show sex scenes or anything like that between the two guys, so don't worry about any of that, you don't have to see anything like that, but I thought it was really well done. I thought it was very funny, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that, but you're right that it would have been just as functional a movie if it had been a straight couple, and it's nice that homosexual relations have been normalized to the point where it's barely even a plot point. It's like, oh yeah, these guys are gay, and these are their in-laws,
Right.
and so much of the humor really was in the in-laws meeting each other for the first time, and yeah, I think most people can relate in some way or another to that movie.
Walter, did you watch that one?
I didn't see the parenting yet. I'm
Oh,
just
okay.
thinking though, so much of what you guys are saying. Well, it's just got so many thoughts going through my head. Just this, why is it that people like? Okay, if you're like 15 and you sit down and it's like a same sex, sex scene, and you're with your mom,
Yeah.
it's like okay, that's a little bit. And it's just like so. I'm just trying to think. I'm just trying to walk through like this feeling of shame you get. But maybe it's not even like maybe it's not even good that when you see sex and it's if it's whatever your sexual orientation is and you see that in your mom's, it's like why can't you just sit and watch that? Why do we have to be all weird about it? And then it's like if it's a sexual orientation that you don't identify as, there's another reaction that people
Right.
get. And I'm just like, I'm trying to figure out where these reactions come from. And it's like, why does it? Yeah, there's people I know that they would get violent again. If you're watching a movie and this happens, they would get violent or they'd get really weird. And it's like, why? It's like, who cares? It's like we can watch this story and just understand the parts that are similar to us. I mean, I don't have the same hair color as that person, and I'm not wearing the same clothes. I'm at the same height. All these things are different. But yeah, just that indoctrinating people to be such a feeling of shame. It's just unhealthy how we feel about sexuality. I guess that's what I'm trying to arrive at.
Well, I think
It's like, and I, as a dad, I need to talk to my girls about sexuality because the number one thing that'll stop them from having control of their life is if they get pregnant when they're 15, right? Before they come into their power and they can get their degrees and all that. It's like if they can have a planned pregnancy, that's the whole. So why should I not? Why should I feel uncomfortable talking about that with them? And so I guess it's just
I think
I'm just I'm working through all these thoughts
yeah.
right now as we're talking.
I think part of it is our culture, the American culture, the United States culture is so prudish is when it comes to sex, and they don't want to see women breastfeeding their children in public, and they need to cover that stuff up, and it's okay for a guy to go shirtless, but if we see a woman's breasts, oh no 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 no. And- but yeah, I think it's like they're just bodies. We all have the same parts, and it's not gonna burn our eyes out if we see someone a woman breastfeeding her child or something like that. It's like, but part of that I think it goes back to religious upbringing, because they it's taught that you're not to look upon another person's body. You're not supposed to look at someone naked and that kind of thing. So we got to cover it up. You can't see it on film or anywhere. And that kind of
Yeah.
that makes it taboo, and it kind of I think it kind of perpetuates more sexual violence. And if this thing is so secret and so you know if we this is something that we can't see, then that makes us want to see it even more and like want to seek it out. And like if you just normalize it, it's like, who cares? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's kind of my thought on it.
Well, I mean, and as a compassionate older person, you're supposed to help guide younger people, through the confusing stages of their life. And God, I mean, that was confusing when I was
Oh yeah,
12 or 13, and I don't think it matters if you're straight or you're gay. Those are confusing times,
right. Yeah,
but then there's like this whole entity that we accept that rather than compassionately guide young people through their developmental stage, they use sexuality and be like, aha, I can leverage this guilt and shame you feel to control you. And then they lie to you. They tell you lies so that they control you. And then a kid is like, "Oh gosh, I got aroused, by I was watching a video and I didn't realize it was two men because all I saw was legs or whatever." And so then they're like,
Yeah.
then they go and kill themselves because and it's like, it's okay to be aroused. I mean, they used to that's how tablecloths got invented because men used to get aroused by the sight of the tables, right? So it's just sort of like arousal is really kind of bizarre. We don't, and actually, the older you get, you're like, oh, I'm glad for it.
Yeah.
You're like, good, some arousal happened, because parts start wearing out on you.
It's
But it's
funny.
sort of like the young thing. Maybe it's that resentment too. When older people are like mad, the younger people can so freely just engage in just like this purest, if it's resentment. So I just don't know. There's so many things at work. I'll be thinking about this conversation for a while, I think.
It's funny to me how there's no objective truth behind the secrecy of certain body parts, and how it's a very arbitrary thing at the end of the day that women wear bras and men are allowed to go shirtless
yeah,
in public.
yeah.
And it's the same thing with who we decide to have sex with. Like, it's only because we're so many people are growing up to believe, oh, it's wrong for a man and a man to do this. But on a very objective level, is it any weirder what men do with women? Because if you really think about it on that level, it's as weird as it is normal, and these are all standards that we create ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think of ankles. You used to not be able to show your ankles, like
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's like if a society can get to that point, it's if they can learn that, they can unlearn that too. We've clearly seen that unlearned.
Yeah,
I'm
the
glad we
problem
moved
is
it.
it's going to take so long to go the other way, to kind of change that mindset.
Yeah. Well, I think the older people and that's the other thing, like younger people, just accept what they're presented with, you know? So it's like, and it just does seem, it's more and more, I'm just coming to this conclusion that the reason all these just absurd hate ideologies persist is because they just attack little kids who don't have the power to push back. I mean, everything is pumped into these little kids, and we've normalized this. And the right falsely accuses other people of indoctrinating kids, but the reality is the only side that indoctrinates is the side that uses hate. Because as an adult, if you're a fully formed adult, and somebody tries to sell you all this nonsense to you, you're like, get out of here with that. You know, that's stupid. But it's only a little kid, who is powerless to resist a lying adult, who can be forced to take on. And it's just so harmful to you. How much it costs you that you're unable to just, have casual relationships that can be sexual relationships as long as they're respectful with whoever you want. And it doesn't have to be like this is one person and you're with that person forever, even if you see you're not compatible. And it's like it's so much healthier to be like, I'll try this for a while. This doesn't work. We will respectfully move on to the next thing. And it's just sort of like you're allowed to experiment. That's what human beings, do. And if something doesn't work for you, you're crazy if you keep doing the same thing. You need to do something else. But yeah, just so much that we're forced to give up, just because of these enduring hostile and hate ideologies and we've all trained ourselves not even to call them out. So maybe I guess the
Right.
starting point is just that. We just have to do what we're doing now, but then take it further into our life and call them out more and think about it more. Because there's a lot I have to think about now with how I'm raising my own children and how I talk about sexuality with them. Because I don't want to inadvertently be passing on the hate stuff that'll hold them back and make them miserable.
I think a
Right.
lot about the pendulum effect of society and culture. How so much there's so much growth in the LGBT community that owes to the fact that uh, Trump really tried to repress them during his first term, and probably it wouldn't have grown to be what it is if they didn't do that and try to say, oh, this is wrong, and inspire so many marches and protests where people say, no, this is who we are. And we're going through the other side of that pendulum right now where they're going back to trying to race us. But um, I think that 10 years from now, there's a fair chance that we'll look at these days and think of it as a catalyst for further acceptance.
Mm. Another movie that came to mind was the Kinsey Report with Liam Neeson. And just the part in there where he just mentioned, he's like, well, everybody thinks it's one way or the other. And in actuality, it's like we're all at different points along this line. And that starts making a lot of sense. And that's another problem. It's like every time we reduce anything to binary, there's only man or woman. There's only two things,
Yeah.
or there's
Yeah.
only left or right. There's only this or that. And that's another way to just control people because nothing is that simple. Everything is way more complex than that. And I understand in the film they were saying there was just an enormous pushback to his suggestion that it's like, maybe some people are, this and that and then the scientist with his scientific mind, he's like, well, maybe I'll experiment with a same sex relationship just to see and to give it an honest experiment because
Yeah.
otherwise, but that's a hard thing to do to cast off. My time where I got to live in Peru for 10 years, that was an exercise in casting off a lot of my American, ideology and trying on another ideology. Learning a foreign language does that too. So I've done that to some extent, but I really haven't tried it like from a sexuality standpoint. But, it's an interesting thing. Just these thought experiments of that, allowing yourself to think through these other different realities you could have had. Yeah, it's fascinating. It makes life so much better. Brings color into your life.
I knew about the Kinsey scale, but I haven't watched that movie, The Kinsey Report. I didn't know.
I think it's called Kinsey. I think it's called Kinsey. It's got Liam
Oh,
Neeson.
okay.
The Kinsey Report. I can't remember the title, but one of those.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I know about the Kinsey scale. If
Yeah.
everybody's on kind of basically
Yeah.
a scale from 0 to a 6 or something like that, if you're
Yeah.
straight or gay. I don't think I don't think there's anybody or very few people who are completely straight or completely gay. I think
Yeah.
there's always some at least curiosity on either side, and that puts you, just a little bit, maybe a 0.5 or wherever it is. But yeah, I think that's true for pretty much everybody, and whether they want to admit it or not.
Yeah. Well, and then it falls into two of the old, like, if you masturbate, you're going to go blind type thing, right? And
Yeah.
it's sort of like there was the Billy Connolly he had a great routine about that. He's like, because somebody's like, you only get 100 times is what they said. And then you fall over dead. He's just like, I never was as scared as when I did it the 100th time.
Oh
He's like, but
gosh.
I did it anyway, you know? So it's just sort of like, but that's a case of, well, that's easy to disprove. You're not going to go blind. You're not going to die. But then they displace it and they're like, you're going to have, and then they're just like mysterious things, bad things are going to happen. And that we've been talking about horror movies before, how the scariest thing is the stuff you build up in your own mind. And that's
Yeah.
really the nefarious aspect of these hate indoctrinations, because they don't specifically say it. Because if they were specific, it would lose all power. But by not saying it, it makes the torment, equivalent to like the creative mind of the person being tormented. So like what I can imagine for torture is different and it's unique to me. So it's like this hate
Yeah.
indoctrination is just awful. It's just so awful what they do. But then people just brush it aside, and we just don't fully understand just the level of cruelty we're inflicting upon our kids. Yeah. Whew.
So, did you watch any of the others that I sent you?
I'd seen Milk.
Philadelphia
Oh, right,
was
Ben.
yeah, Philadelphia was one I'd seen in the past and had quite an impact on me. Milk I haven't seen. I was intrigued enough by the cast that I think that I need to check that one out. I've only aware of the name Harvey Milk, but I don't really know a whole lot about the story.
Yeah, I actually didn't know a lot about it either until I watched the movie, and it was just recently that I finally watched it. But yeah, that was a really good one, and also, very sad. Of course,
Yeah.
being based on a
Yeah.
true story. That was, I mean, I'm so glad he had the courage to stand up and to be so active, fighting
Yeah.
for rights in the queer community. But it's also very sad. I mean, I don't think I'm giving anything away by
Yeah.
saying he was
Yeah.
assassinated, but that part was so needless and sad.
Yeah.
I was very interested to see that it came out in 2008, just a year after Sean Penn directed Into the Wild and cast Emile Hirsch in it, and then the two acted alongside one another in that movie. And I'm just kind of surprised that I hadn't really heard about that movie. Yeah.
I was gonna say it kind of illustrates too. I mean, there's all these kind of legendary firsts. We're thinking of Jackie Robinson and Harvey Milk, and Kamala Harris too, being the first. Many of the offices she was elected to were the first time a black woman had been elected to those, and it's just. I hope nothing awful happens to Kamala Harris, of course, but that's one of those things. The way things are going now, and we
Right.
just kind of see, these people that are the first. Their stories aren't that happy, and Jackie Robinson's story was pretty miserable too. The way he was treated, being the first in baseball, and just and even like the pushback to Barack Obama too as president. I think we're still in the pushback to that, and just like the depth of these. I don't know. It's. I think that's something to keep in mind whenever we're reading about history and we're celebrating people that were the first and who brought things forward. And maybe we just need to understand it was probably just awful for them the whole time they were there. I'm sure a lot of their experience day to day. Maybe that's something that'll give us a little bit of strength right now as we're going through a hard
Yeah.
time. And that, as Ben said, hopefully these hard moments now and the things that we're learning now, because all these conversations I'm having now for the last, since the election wouldn't have been possible until I had an emotional breakdown after the election. And I
Yeah.
called up Will Fullwood basically in tears. And you could listen to a couple of my podcasts and then it's like, the nation is this awful, and it's like that realization. And a lot of people we're like, well, we always told you it was this bad. And, you're just the straight white male doesn't understand. And it's like, well, now you're empowered because you understand how bad it is. And we can speak truthfully because those risks are thus out there. waiting to gobble up our kids, and we have to work to fix it.
I'm blanking on the exact wording of the quote, but history always skews toward progress. And I think that 50, 100 years from now, people will be able to state pretty objectively that the Trump administration represented a horrible period of regression, and it's thankful that we're no longer there now. I mean, in the future, speaking hypothetically, because we are there now. But
Yeah.
Right.
um, but
Well, I
yeah,
just don't see.
I'd be surprised if this lasted forever. I do look forward to the future and what sorts of progressive movements are going to stem from this awful period of regression.
I think that's a good transition. Let's transition to, because I appreciate you guys so much, and I appreciate this weekend I got to go out and have the community there, and of course, the Peace for America and Peace for Freedom celebrations, as I like to call them, the patriotic celebrations of the weekend. There's a lot of rainbows, and a lot of people dressed up as unicorns, and people come up. I had a shirt that said "Elect Women," and this older lady came up and wanted to give me a hug just for having that, and just like when you're really pushed up against the wall and everybody's struggling, and because my experience isn't the same as either of yours, but there's so much similarity to the fear I felt and the hatred, and just for no reason I could understand, and the shame I was forced to feel and the guilt I was forced to feel. And it's just so nice to talk about it with people, and realize we all had to feel that way, and it was nonsense, and then we can move forward, you know with in pursuit of a better life for ourselves and our kids and everybody. So yeah, thank you guys for coming today.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm really appreciative that you had me on. I was able to talk about some of this. I didn't get to a lot of the horror comedy horror that
Yeah.
I had found, but I plan on writing an article. I figured I'd do some movie recommendations in an article, so I'll get it
Yeah.
out there anyway.
Yeah, this wasn't quite as entertainment focused as I thought it might be, but I'm glad that it went to a happy place because these are important conversations to have, and yeah,
Yeah.
things that people are often very reluctant to talk about. So
Yeah.
thank you for coming on, Brandon, and thank you as always, Walter, for doing these with me.
Yep. Thanks so much. I felt really emotional today, and I feel,
Yeah.
I was like, I appreciate being more connected to you guys. Group hug. I like to do group hugs. Group hug. Group hug. There we go. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day or night.
Thanks a
Be
lot.
safe.
Bye, guys.
Community. Love wins.